I faked amnesia to escape an arranged marriage that felt like a prison sentence. And if I had to do it again, I would. My name is Kale Ardent, I am 22 years old, the only Omega son of the Ardent family from the Silver Crescent Pack, a once powerful bloodline that has been slowly losing influence over the past decade. And ever since my father fell ill and our borders weakened, our survival has depended on alliances rather than strength. My mother always told me that being born in Omega in a noble house meant two things. Beauty would be praised and freedom would be limited. I grew up in a palace filled with etiquette lessons, political whispers, and careful smiles, knowing that one day I would not marry for love but for strategy. When tensions rose between our pack and the Northern Kingdom, when rival alphas circled our lands like wolves scenting weakness, the solution was simple and cruel: bind the Silver Crescent to the strongest ruler alive through marriage. That ruler was the Alpha King of the North. They said he was undefeated in battle, untouchable in negotiation, feared by enemies and obeyed without question by his court. They said becoming his mate was an honor. They never asked if it was something I wanted. I had never met him before the arrangement was sealed. I had only heard the rumors: cold, ruthless, emotionally distant, a king who did not believe in love, only loyalty and power. To everyone else, this marriage was salvation for my family, but to me it felt like a beautifully decorated prison sentence. And I was expected to share his bed and bear his mark. So on the eve of the final ceremony, when the palace corridors glowed with gold and expectation, I made a choice. If I could not refuse the marriage, I would escape it. The fall down the grand marble staircase was not part of my plan, but when my foot slipped and my body struck the cold floor, pain burst behind my eyes and I realized fate had handed me the perfect opportunity. I let the darkness take me immediately, falling unconscious. When I awoke up, the air smelled of white lilies and expensive incense, and unfamiliar ceilings loomed above me as hushed voices echoed around the room. Someone whispered, "Your Majesty, he's waking up," and I kept my breathing slow, my thoughts sharp, because this was my only chance. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was him, tall, commanding, draped in midnight robes stitched with silver, black hair framing sharp golden eyes that were not cold but calculating. He was studying me as though I were a puzzle already solved. The servants bowed the moment he stepped closer. Yet he did not look at them, only at me, and in a low, controlled voice he asked, "Do you remember who you are?" My heart pounded, but I let my fingers tremble and confusion cloud my gaze as I whispered, "Who are you?" The room fell silent, the healer froze, a minister gasped softly, but the Alpha King did not look shocked or angry. Instead, his lips curved into something that was not quite a smile but close enough to unsettle me. He leaned in until I could feel the warmth of his breath and asked if I truly did not recognize him, and I shook my head again, careful and convincing, expecting outrage or suspicion. Yet all he said was a single word: interesting. The silence after he said interesting stretched so long that I almost broke character just to fill it, but the Alpha King straightened slowly, his expression smoothing into something unreadable as he turned to the healer and calmly ordered everyone to leave us alone. And the way the entire room emptied within seconds reminded me exactly who he was. When the doors shut and we were finally alone, my pulse began to race because pretending in front of an audience was one thing, but pretending alone with the most powerful alpha in the kingdom was another. He moved a chair closer to my bed without asking for permission, sat down with effortless authority, and folded his hands in his lap as if we were about to discuss the weather instead of my obvious lie. "You don't remember your name?" he asked quietly, and I hesitated just long enough to appear confused before shaking my head, forcing my eyes to wander around the room like everything was unfamiliar. He watched every movement carefully, not missing a single detail, and then he began speaking in a tone so smooth it unsettled me more than anger would have. He told me my name was Kale Ardent, that I came from the Silver Crescent Pack, that our families had agreed to unite our territories through marriage, and he said it all with the patience of someone recounting a story he had memorized. I nodded slowly as if trying to process new information. He surprised me again by reaching for the glass of water beside my bed, lifted it to my lips and held it there himself, his fingers brushing lightly against mine, and the simple contact sent a strange warmth through my chest that I was not prepared for. "You must be frightened," he murmured, and there was no mockery in his voice, only something softer, something almost protective, which made my deception feel heavier than before. I swallowed carefully and asked in a weak voice if we were truly married, and he paused just slightly before answering that the ceremony had not been completed yet, that fate had interrupted it, and something in the way he said fate made me wonder if he believed my fall was anything but accidental. Over the next few days he visited often, sometimes under the excuse of checking on my recovery, sometimes without any excuse at all, and each time he behaved like a patient guide helping a lost soul rediscover his world. He showed me the palace gardens, describing how I had once complained about the northern climate being too cold, and he pointed to the balcony outside my chamber, claiming I had stood there on my first night and said the stars felt different in his kingdom. I had never said such things, yet the way he spoke about them made them feel real, and I began to question whether he was building a new version of our past on purpose. At meals, he would dismiss the servants and sit across from me, watching as I carefully avoided slipping into familiar behavior, and whenever I almost reacted too naturally, his eyes would gleam faintly as though he had noticed. "Your memory may be gone," he said one evening as candlelight flickered between us, "but your habits remain," and I nearly choked on my tea because it was my favorite blend, the exact one I had requested the day I arrived, something I had never mentioned aloud since pretending to forget. I asked him how he could be so calm about all of this, how he could trust someone who did not even remember him, and he leaned back slightly, studying me with that same unreadable expression before replying that trust had nothing to do with it. "You are my intended mate," he said evenly, "and whether you remember that or not, my duty does not change." His words should have sounded possessive, yet they felt more like a promise than a threat, and that confused me more than anything else. I had expected a tyrant, a cold ruler who would demand obedience and punish weakness, but instead I found an alpha who observed quietly, who never forced proximity yet always seemed near, who allowed me space while somehow tightening the invisible thread between us. One afternoon, while walking through the inner courtyard, I overheard two ministers whispering that the king had refused 3 advantageous proposals in the past, rejecting powerful Omega heirs from influential pacts without hesitation, and the realization struck me like a sudden gust of wind. If he had not wanted this marriage, he could have declined it as well. That night, unable to sleep, I stood by the balcony staring at the unfamiliar northern sky when I sensed him behind me before he even spoke. "You favor that spot," he said softly, and I stiffened, forcing myself to look confused again, but he stepped beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, and added, "Even without your memories, you gravitate toward the same view." I asked him why he was really agreeing to continue the marriage when it would be easier to release me now that I conveniently remembered nothing, and for the first time since my fall, silence settled over him in a way that felt genuine. His golden eyes shifted from the stars to my face, searching, measuring, deciding how much to reveal, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Because some decisions," he said slowly, "are not made out of convenience." The air between us grew heavier, charged with something unspoken, and I felt the first crack in my carefully constructed plan, because the more he treated me with quiet consideration instead of anger, the harder it became to pretend I felt nothing. I had faked amnesia to escape him, convinced that the Alpha King was my cage, yet standing beside him under the open sky, I began to sense a different possibility, one far more dangerous than political obligation, because if he truly saw through my lies and still chose to stay, then the prison I feared might not be him at all, but the feelings slowly forming in my own traitorous heart. A week passed in that strange balance between deception and quiet tension, and just when I began convincing myself that I could maintain the act until an opportunity to return home appeared, the illusion shattered. It happened during the Royal Council banquet, a gathering held in honor of strengthening alliances, where nobles from across the northern territories filled the grand hall in shimmering fabrics and calculating smiles. I had insisted on attending despite my fragile condition, claiming I wished to relearn the world I had forgotten, and the Alpha King had agreed far too easily, as if he were curious to see how far I would take my performance. The moment we entered together, every eye in the hall shifted toward us, and I felt the weight of expectation settle on my shoulders like chains disguised as silk. Whispers followed in our wake, questions about my memory, speculation about the postponed ceremony, subtle doubts about my worth if I could not even remember my future mate. I kept my expression soft and uncertain, playing the part perfectly, until a voice cut through the murmurs. Lord Valor, one of the king's most influential advisors, stepped forward with a smile that did not reach his eyes and bowed just enough to appear respectful. He spoke of loyalty, of stability, of how unfortunate it would be if the Silver Crescent alliance collapsed due to unforeseen complications, and though his words were coated in courtesy, the threat beneath him was sharp. He suggested, almost too smoothly, that perhaps the king should reconsider binding himself to an Omega whose memory, and therefore political value, had become unreliable. The hall grew tense, waiting to see how the Alpha King would respond. I expected anger. I expected dominance. Instead, the king's expression remained calm as winter, and he placed a steady hand at the small of my back, not possessive enough to cause scandal, but firm enough to silence the room. In a voice that carried effortlessly across the hall, he stated that his decisions were not influenced by temporary weakness, and that anyone questioning his chosen mate was questioning him directly. The temperature of the room seemed to drop instantly, and Lord Vaylor lowered his head, retreating with stiff politeness, but the damage had been done. Later that night, unable to ignore the unease clawing at my chest, I wandered the palace corridors and accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. Hidden behind a half-closed door to the council chamber, I heard Vaylor speaking in a low, urgent tone, arguing that if the marriage dissolved, the Silver Crescent Pack would be left vulnerable, and that rival alphas were already negotiating to claim our territory should the alliance fail. He claimed that sending me back would weaken both kingdoms and ignite war, and then he said something that made my breath catch. He revealed that before the arrangement was finalized, another northern warlord had requested me specifically as part of a separate deal, a man known for cruelty toward his Omegas. The Alpha King's voice followed, colder than I had heard it before, and he stated clearly that he had agreed to the marriage not for political gain, but to prevent that rival from ever laying claim to me. He admitted that dissolving the union now would reopen negotiations and place me directly in danger, and that regardless of my memory or lack thereof, he would not allow that to happen. There was no hesitation in his tone, no calculation, only certainty. My entire understanding of the situation fractured in that moment. I had believed he was my captor, the architect of my confinement, yet the truth unfolded differently. He had been the barrier standing between me and something far worse. The arranged marriage I had viewed as a prison might have been a shield all along. As I stepped back from the door, heart racing with the weight of what I had just learned, I realized the true twist was not that he saw through my lie, but that he had chosen to protect me anyway. When I returned to my chamber, I found him already there, standing near the window as if he had known I would discover the truth sooner or later. He did not turn immediately, but when he did, his golden eyes searched my face with quiet understanding. "You were not meant to hear that," he said calmly, and the absence of anger in his voice made my guilt burn hotter. I asked him why he had not told me from the beginning, why he allowed me to believe he was forcing this marriage, and his answer was devastatingly simple. He said that trust cannot be demanded, it can only be given freely, and that if I chose to leave once I regained my memories, he would not chain me to a throne I did not want. In that instant, the power dynamic shifted completely. I was no longer the trapped Omega desperate to escape, and he was no longer the cold king imposing his will. Instead, I stood in the middle of a choice I had not anticipated: stay with the Alpha who had quietly safeguarded my future, or walk away and risk becoming a pawn in someone else's ambition. The game I thought I was controlling had turned inside out, and the most dangerous part was not that he had seen through my deception, but that he had offered me freedom anyway, knowing it might cost him everything. That night, after learning the truth, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my chamber, and for the first time since I arrived in the Northern Kingdom, my lie felt heavier than the crown I had been trying to avoid. I had convinced myself that I was clever, that I was the only one capable of playing a dangerous game, but now every memory of his quiet patience replayed in my mind like a punishment. The way he never pressured me, the way he adjusted his pace to match mine during our walks, the way he stood slightly closer whenever unfamiliar nobles approached, not to control me but to shield me, it all rearranged itself into something I could no longer ignore. The next morning I avoided him. I claimed exhaustion when he came to check on me, kept my answers short, forced distance between us, because if I stayed too close, I feared my resolve would crumble completely. He did not question my behavior, and somehow that hurt more than if he had demanded an explanation. Days passed in strained politeness, our conversations reduced to formal exchanges, and the palace felt colder than ever before. I told myself this was good, that emotional detachment would make leaving easier, yet every time I imagined walking away, a tight ache spread through my chest. Then everything broke. Word spread through the palace that a rival alpha had begun mobilizing forces near the Silver Crescent borders, exploiting the uncertainty surrounding our delayed union, and I saw the tension in the council chambers even before anyone officially informed me. I confronted him that evening, anger and fear tangling together in my voice as I accused him of hiding the severity of the situation, of carrying the burden alone as if I were too fragile to handle the truth. He listened without interruption, his expression steady, until I finally demanded to know why he was still willing to risk war for a marriage that might not even happen. His answer was not strategic. It was not political. He said quietly that protecting me was not a calculation. It was instinct. Something inside me cracked at that word. I told him he was a fool, that he barely knew me, that I had lied to his face from the very beginning, and the confession tore out of me before I could stop it. I admitted that I remembered everything, that I had faked the amnesia out of fear, out of resentment, out of desperation to avoid being trapped, and I braced myself for the storm I deserved. But he did not rage. He did not shout. He simply closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if absorbing a blow he had already anticipated, and when he opened them again, there was no anger there, only something wounded and unbearably calm. He said he knew from the first moment I looked at him, that my confusion had been too careful, my fear too measured, and that he chose not to expose me because he wanted to give me the freedom to decide whether I would stay without coercion. The weight of his restraint crushed me more than any fury could have. I told him I never asked for his protection, that I did not want to be the reason kingdoms stood on the brink of conflict, and in a voice that finally trembled, I said that perhaps the simplest solution was for me to leave altogether. If I returned to the Silver Crescent alone and publicly withdrew from the alliance, the blame would fall on me, not on him, and the Northern Kingdom could negotiate anew without appearing weak. It was a reckless plan, one that would likely place me directly in the path of the rival Alpha's ambition, but at least it would free him from choosing between his throne and his heart. For the first time since I had known him, the Alpha King's composure fractured. He stepped forward sharply, closing the distance between us, his golden eyes burning not with dominance but with raw emotion. He asked if I truly believed my life was a disposable bargaining chip, if I thought he would allow me to walk willingly into danger just to preserve his political standing. His voice rose slightly, not in anger but in desperation, and that was what undid me completely. Because kings were not supposed to sound desperate. I felt tears sting my eyes, frustration and guilt and something far more fragile crashing together inside me, and I admitted the truth I had been avoiding. I was no longer trying to escape him. I was trying to escape how much he mattered. I told him that the more I learned about him, the more impossible it became to leave without losing something irreplaceable, and that terrified me more than any arranged marriage ever had. Silence fell between us, thick and fragile. He reached for my hand slowly this time, giving me every chance to pull away, and when I did not, his fingers closed around mine with a warmth that steadied my racing thoughts. He said that he did not need me to stay out of obligation or gratitude, that he would rather endure political fallout than bind me to him through fear, and that if I chose to walk away, he would personally ensure no rival alpha ever touched me. That was the moment I broke completely. Because love offered without chains is far more terrifying than love forced by duty. I realized then that my greatest fear had never been the arranged marriage, nor the Alpha King's power, but the vulnerability of choosing him willingly. And as I stood there with tears I could no longer hide and his steady presence anchoring me in place, I understood that the prison I had tried so desperately to escape was never the throne beside him. It was the walls I had built around my own heart, walls that were now crumbling beyond repair. The night before I was meant to give him my final answer, the palace felt unnaturally quiet, and I found myself standing once again at the top of the grand marble staircase where everything had begun, staring down at the steps that had once carried my lie. I could still leave, I reminded myself, because he had never locked the gates, never ordered guards to shadow me, never once used his power to cage me, and yet my feet did not move toward freedom, they carried me toward him. He was in the throne room but not seated on the throne. Instead he stood by the tall windows overlooking the kingdom, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders straight beneath the weight of responsibility. When I entered, he did not turn immediately, yet his voice reached me softly. "Kale." he called out as he turned, golden eyes steady but guarded, as if he had prepared himself for rejection. "Have you decided?" he asked, his tone calm but not indifferent. I swallowed and stepped closer. "Yes." Silence stretched between us, fragile and waiting. "I came to say something," I said quietly. His brows furrowed slightly. "Actually, I was afraid of losing my freedom, afraid of becoming nothing more than a political symbol. I thought if I pretended to forget you, I could escape before I ever had to feel anything real." He did not interrupt. He simply listened, his gaze never leaving mine. "I remember everything," I continued, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. "I always did. I lied because I was scared. But somewhere along the way you stopped feeling like a prison." A faint breath left him, almost imperceptible. "Then what do I feel like now?" he asked softly. The vulnerability in that question shattered what little composure I had left. "You feel like home," I admitted. "And that terrifies me more than anything ever has." He took one careful step toward me as if approaching something delicate. "Are you choosing this because you feel indebted to me?" "No," I said immediately, shaking my head. "Not because you protected me. Not because our pacts expect it. I'm choosing this because when I imagine walking away, it hurts more than staying ever did." For the first time, the controlled mask he wore slipped, and emotion flickered openly across his face. "Do you know what I feared?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "That you would never see me as anything but a tyrant," he confessed. "That no matter what I did, you would always believe this marriage was forced upon you." I stepped closer until only a breath separated us. "You could have exposed my lie the moment I woke up. It's because I did not want your obedience, Kale. I wanted your choice." The words settled between us, heavy and sincere. "I'm choosing you," I whispered. "Not because I have to. Because I want to." His hand lifted slowly, giving me time to pull away, but I didn't, and when his fingers gently cupped my face, his touch was reverent rather than possessive. "Say it clearly," he murmured, eyes searching mine as if committing this moment to memory. "I want to be your mate," I said, heart pounding. A breath I didn't realize he'd been holding escaped him. He rested his forehead against mine and closed his eyes briefly. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that," he admitted. I blinked in surprise. "You didn't even know me." "I knew enough," he replied softly. "Enough to recognize strength behind your defiance. Enough to admire the courage it took to lie to a king." A small, breathless laugh escaped me. "You were never angry?" "Oh, I was furious," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "But not because you deceived me. Because you were prepared to face the consequences alone." Emotion swelled in my chest, overwhelming and fierce. "I don't want to face anything alone anymore." "Then don't," he answered simply. "Stand with me." When he asked one final time, "Will you become my mate of your own will?" there was no hesitation left in me. "Yes," I said firmly. "I will." The ceremony that followed was grand and powerful, and when we stood before the kingdom side by side, I did not feel trapped. I felt steady. As he took my hand before our people and declared, "He stands beside me by choice," pride rather than pressure filled my chest. When he finally marked our union, it was not a claim of ownership but a vow whispered only for me. "You are not my prisoner," he said against my skin. "You are my partner." And as applause echoed through the hall, I realized the greatest twist of all had not been that he saw through my lie, nor that I had tried to escape our fate. It was that the Alpha King I feared most had given me the one thing I never expected from an arranged marriage: freedom to love him willingly. I once believed this union was a prison sentence, but in the end it became my choice, and sometimes the bravest thing an Omega can do is not to run from the Alpha King who sees through his lies, but to stand still long enough to say, "I choose you." If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment and subscribe for more BL stories. Thanks for watching.